Welcome to Lesson 6, Purple Prose. So, to me, effective descriptive prose is words that pull the reader into the world the character inhabits. It helps you imagine feeling the cutting, burning sand on the howling wind as you traverse the desert alongside the characters. The best prose can blur the line between the reader and the character experiencing the environment and the actions. We're not seeing characters stand in an empty white space talking to each other because the author forgot to paint the picture. Or feeling the humidity accelerating the perspiration of anxiety as the handoff between a drug dealer and undercover cop goes down in a graffiti back alley that smells of yesterday's donuts and rotting rat feces. Now, there is such a thing as going too far with description. A common term is purple prose, where the author is so flowery with their word choice and literary techniques, the meaning is lost. The reader is paying more attention to the physical ink and paper in their hand as if it were a cipher, trying to decode it rather than relishing in the story it's trying to convey. I wouldn't worry too much about this in the first draft, but after you've drafted the story and are in editing phase, I would suggest going over your descriptions to see if they are clear or overly abstract and complex. Let me define those terms for you: abstract and complex. An abstract description can come in a few flavors. It can compare something physical to an idea. His lips felt like pure love. What does that mean? Every person has a different picture in their mind when they think of love, depending on their personal experiences with it. Is love soft and gentle, hard and possessive with a jealous streak, the love of a father for a newborn, the heated passion of a lover? Every definition is valid, but we need more context in this story to figure out which version the author is intending. A less abstract description could be: his lips pressed gently on the newborn's wrinkled forehead with all the unconditional love of a newfound father. Sometimes you don't want any abstraction and use concrete descriptions. His lips pressed gently to the newborn's wrinkled forehead. With each tiny heartbeat that pulsed against his hand, he vowed to protect her. Another version of abstraction is when you describe something in parts. Instead of saying it was an elephant, you describe each piece of anatomy to create a bigger picture. If the author spends paragraphs describing tusks, a tail, ears, skin, huge feet, and a trunk, the reader will get confused if any of the anatomical elements are described in an unclear or unexpected way. They may think, wait, I thought this was an elephant, but the tail doesn't sound like an elephant tail. Is this whole thing a magical creature I've never heard of? My advice for describing a creature and object in parts is to identify what the creature is or object is first, and only go into details on the parts that differ from what's expected. First, let us know it's an elephant. Then go into a specific. Is it a three-legged elephant? Is there a massive scar on its back? Was one tusk pilfered by a poacher? Or, if we are up close and personal, only describe the parts that are interacting with the character. What does the wrinkled skin under the character's hand feel like? Is the thick trunk wrapping around the character's waist playfully? We don't need the minute details about every single aspect of the creature. This will slow the story to a crawl and probably make the reader lose interest. They may start skimming or even put the book down entirely. Another way to abstract is to label something as something else. Instead of calling the moon, you call it the observer of the night forever stationed in the inky sky, with no spelled out simile or metaphor beforehand. With no concrete definition connected to it, our imaginations run wild. Is there a god cursed to forever be in the night sky as only an observer? Is there a space station so advanced it can self-repair? We have no idea. So let's move on to overly complex descriptions. Overly complex descriptions also have various forms. One is where there are so many similes and metaphors, the original thing being described is lost and forgotten, buried beneath the prose. So, brainstorming is like panning for gold. The flecks and nuggets come in different sizes, shapes, and carats. If you're not careful, a nugget may fall back into the water or be plucked up by a bird, And that bird may go on too. You get the picture. Keep bringing the comparison back to home base, back to the original idea. Brainstorming is like panning for gold. Each sparkly fleck of an idea or whole nugget of backstory have value. Don't forget to write them down, or they may float off in the river of time and be forgotten. Some ideas are unique concepts that need protection from circling birds of prey, etc. Another way to overcomplicate a description is to flip back and forth from describing the interior of the room, to the view outside the window, to the girl in the room, to the view, back to the interior, back to the view. Streamline it. Describing one section or character at a time, try not to give the reader whiplash. Okay, but what if the prose makes sense to you? How can you tell if it's too abstract or complicated to the average reader? This is where beta reading comes in. Ask the reader to highlight, comment, or somehow indicate where they get confused or have to reread something to understand it. The need to reread something multiple times can be a death sentence to a book. It slows the pacing down immensely and pulls the reader out of the story, making them reach for the dictionary, or worse, never pick up the book again. Now that doesn't mean you should only use simple language, but make sure understandable context clues are there, especially for made-up sci-fi and fantasy words. Remember that example of a sunset over the sea from the previous lessons? Well, here's an over-the-top version to illustrate how flowery these purple proses can go. Purple prose version. Hues of various saturations bled in rivers, scattering through the wispy suspended droplets above the horizon, swathing the golden yolk of life as it descended into its aquatic bed of foam and waves. When the final ray of warmth winked out, the ink of death became the sky. What on earth was that? There are some pretty words and turns of phrase, but what did it mean? We have the abstraction of sun as a golden yolk of life, without labeling it as the sun first. Clouds are wispy suspended droplets above the horizon, which may be scientifically true, but some people may not picture it as lacy, wispy clouds. They may think of individual rain droplets frozen in place in midair. Last one. Purple prose. The beast glided majestically, body cutting through the anointed waters in which it abode. Each bump of his exposed body glinted under the ruthless ruler of the sky. The hardened calcium daggers of his countenance were exposed in a grin, a covenant of soul-ripping pain and snuffing out of one's inner candle should you impinge upon its territory. This is a purple version of the crocodile glided in the water of the Nile, glittering in the sun. Its exposed teeth were a promise of danger and death. The generalization of beast makes it hard to imagine what type of animal this is, since it hasn't been specifically stated in this sentence. We get some pieces of anatomy described and try and figure out what it is. All we know is it has a bumpy body and hardened calcium daggers. Some people may see through this abstraction and understand those are teeth, but that's not guaranteed. Ruthless ruler of the sky is an interesting way to describe the sun, but abstracted so far, we aren't sure if it's referencing a deity, a type of bird, or something else entirely. It needs to be tied to the idea of the sun further with a simile or metaphor. We also got some melodrama with soul-ripping pain. The creature in this instance can't actually touch one's soul. The snuffing out of one's inner candle is a pretty way to say die, but when mixed with all these other pretty and abstract phrasings, it's just another straw on the camel's back to try and decipher. Purple prose, while pretty, is not the most effective way to convey information. I think the most effective descriptions give insight to the point of view character, let us know what's important in the surroundings, and keep us interested. To wrap up, if multiple readers have to stop and reread a sentence or description multiple times to understand it, try simplifying it and making the language more specific and concrete. And that wraps up Lesson 6. See you all in Lesson 7, where we start going through the senses, 2 at a time, seeing how we can utilize them in our prose.